The rain did not simply fall over Puget Sound that night. It drove sideways off the black water, stinging the windshield of my 1958 Chris Craft flatbed like a fistful of thrown gravel. I kept both hands pressed flat against the top curve of the wooden steering wheel. I was 62 years old. My knuckles ached with the deep structural throb of a man who had spent 4 decades wrestling steam-bent oak into boat hulls. Right then, bathed in the blinding surgical glare of a police cruiser's spotlight, my hands were trembling. The loudspeaker had barked its mechanical command through the squall 30 seconds earlier. I had cut the engine. I waited in the cold cab, listening to the relentless drumming on the metal roof. Boots crunched against the wet asphalt of the highway shoulder. The footsteps were entirely wrong for a felony traffic stop. They lacked the aggressive, adrenaline-fueled tempo of an officer moving in on a threat. These steps were heavy. They were reluctant. They were the steps of a man forcing himself toward a wreck he did not want to investigate. The silhouette stopped beside my driver's side window. The glare from the cruiser behind me turned the interior of my truck into a stark, shadowless box, exposing every scar on my palms. I rolled the glass down. The coastal wind bit into my neck, bringing the sharp scent of ozone and salt. The officer did not have a hand hovering near his holster. His shoulders were slumped against the storm, rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap. It was Detective Elias Vance. The man my daughter Clara was scheduled to marry next spring. The man who sat at my kitchen table on Sunday mornings drinking dark roast and asking me how to properly sand fiberglass. Elias reached up and depressed the radio mic on his shoulder. A second later, the blinding spotlight in my rearview mirror snapped off. The interior of the cab sank back into the soft green glow of the dashboard gauges. "Arthur," Elias murmured. His voice was scraped hollow, stripped of all institutional authority. "Tell me what is happening." I opened my mouth, but the freezing air simply hit the back of my throat. I sat in a truck I had rebuilt bolt by bolt, stripped and varnished with my own sweat, pulled over on Interstate 5 as if I were a common thief. A sour, metallic taste pooled at the base of my tongue. "I was driving home from the shipyard, Elias," I managed to say. The words felt fragile. "The same route I've driven since '98. Elias closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He looked like a man watching a support beam fracture. He unclipped a weatherproof dispatch tablet from his vest and turned the illuminated screen toward my window. "The automated plate readers flagged you at the county line," Elias said. The muscle in his jaw flexed in tight, rigid spasms. "The vehicle was reported stolen an hour ago. Aggravated theft." I stared at the glowing blue text on the screen. The registered owner of the Chris Craft was listed in stark block letters. Julian Sterling, my son. The sound of the storm seemed to drop away, plunging the cab into a terrifying vacuum. The floorboards of my reality gave way. A father assumes he will carry the weight of his children's mistakes. He assumes he will bail them out, guide them, absorb their anger. He does not anticipate looking at a police tablet and realizing his own blood has quietly stripped him of his legal identity. Elias rested his forearms on the wet windowsill. He did not ask for my registration. He did not ask if there was a misunderstanding. He looked at my face, read the absolute devastation there, and knew the truth. "Start from the beginning," Elias said. "Take your time. I am not going anywhere." Where does a collapse begin? It rarely starts with a massive explosion. It starts with a hairline fracture, hidden where the light cannot reach. "I need to tell you about the rainstorm 4 years ago," I said, my voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. That was the day I handed him the knife. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The Seattle sky had been the color of hammered iron. I was sitting at the massive oak drafting table in the shipyard office, reviewing timber invoices. The room was thick with the scent of cedar shavings, marine epoxy, and the bitter black coffee cooling in my mug. Julian had walked in unannounced. He was 28 at the time, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat that looked alien against the industrial grit of my world. Julian always moved with a frictionless, practiced grace. He belonged in glass-walled corporate boardrooms, navigating abstract acquisitions far away from the dirt and the honest labor of the docks. He pulled up a stool across from me. He set a thick leather-bound portfolio onto the blueprints. "Dad," he began. His tone was perfectly calibrated, a masterful blend of respect and urgent vulnerability. "I need you to anchor me on a project." He laid out a brilliant, watertight narrative. He claimed he was finalizing a massive state-funded maritime preservation grant. It was an initiative designed to subsidize legacy shipyards and protect historical waterfronts. He had navigated the endless bureaucracy, structured the compliance data, and secured the preliminary approvals. But because his personal credit was tied up in a commercial venture, the state board required a guarantor with an established, flawless commercial footprint. He did not ask for my money. He simply asked for the weight of my name. I looked across the drafting table at my son. I felt a profound, foolish swell of pride expand in my chest. I remembered the early days of Sterling Maritime, walking into banks with bottom paint on my boots, begging loan officers for credit extensions while they looked right through me. And here was Julian, leveraging municipal capital with a smile. I believed I was giving him the foundation I had clawed out of the mud. Julian unzipped the portfolio. He produced a stack of dense legal documents. Before sliding them toward me, he laid a single heavy sheet of blank parchment over the top. He explained it was a privacy cover sheet required by the notary to isolate the signature lines for digital processing. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a pen. It was not a standard ballpoint. It was a custom McKean tungsten pen, heavy and gunmetal gray. The knurled grip felt cold and absolute in my calloused fingers. I did not move the blank cover sheet. I did not question the process. I simply trusted my son. Page 3. Page 7. Page 12. Page 19. Julian turned the pages with a brisk clinical efficiency. His manicured finger tapped the highlighted lines. His expression was completely serene, wearing the patient, slightly indulgent look of a professional guiding an old man through modern red tape. I signed my name 19 times that afternoon. My wife Evelyn had stepped into the office halfway through the process. I remember glancing up at her, anticipating a shared smile of maternal pride. She was standing perfectly still by the filing cabinets. She was not looking at my face. She was watching the tungsten pen move across the paper. Her eyes were flat, devoid of any warmth, holding an expression of absolute, chilling calculation. I lacked the vocabulary to read that look then. I thought she was just tired. When it was over, Julian zipped the portfolio, retrieved the heavy pen, and kissed his mother on the cheek. He walked out into the rain. He did not leave a single duplicate copy on the table. I attributed it to the disorganized rush of a young man eager to beat the notary's closing time. And somewhere in the digital archives of a commercial lending firm in downtown Seattle, a $600,000 shadow mortgage was quietly grafted onto the deed of my shipyard. Sitting in the freezing cab of the Chris Craft, the memory solidified into a jagged block of ice in my gut. The theft of the truck tonight was not an endgame. It was a stress test. Julian was probing the perimeter, checking to see if I was too confused, too slow to fight back. "Arthur," Elias's voice pulled me back to the wet, freezing present. The storm outside had intensified, the wind rocking the heavy suspension of the truck. If he transferred the title using a pre-signed power of attorney. "What else did you sign?" I tried to answer, but the world suddenly tilted sideways. A heavy, suffocating static rolled through the front of my skull, thick and gray. It was the fog. For the last 18 months, I had been suffering from terrifying cognitive lapses. I would forget the names of my best carpenters. I would lose the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. I would stare at hull schematics I had drawn myself and find them entirely incomprehensible. Evelyn had been so deeply concerned, managing my schedule, taking over the shipyard mail, bringing me my nightly glass of scotch with a special arthritis tincture to help me sleep. She told me it was just the heavy toll of age. But right then, gripping the steering wheel while the rain hammered the glass, the fog felt entirely different. The sudden inability to hold a thought did not feel like natural decay. It felt chemical. It felt like a deliberate blanket being thrown over my mind. I looked at my calloused hands. They had built vessels designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. But the flood had not come from the sea. The flood had come from my own living room. I was not losing my mind. Someone was systematically taking it from me. The realization that my own blood had weaponized my trust did not hit me as a sudden explosion. It seeped into the marrow of my bones like a freezing coastal tide, a slow, paralyzing horror that was impossible to shake. Elias did not issue a police directive. He gave a quiet, unyielding instruction to a man rapidly suffocating in his own life. "Start the engine, Arthur." He kept his voice low, his eyes scanning the empty stretch of Interstate 5. "Follow my taillights. We are going straight to Clara's. Do not answer your phone if Evelyn calls." The drive back into the heart of Seattle took 35 minutes, every mile stretching the rubber band of my panic tighter. I parked the Chris Craft in the subterranean concrete garage beneath Clara's apartment building. The air down there tasted of damp exhaust and cold limestone. Clara waited for us in her lobby. At 31, my daughter was a senior forensic data auditor for an international logistics firm, currently wearing sweatpants and an oversized university hoodie. But her posture was entirely rigid. She was wound tight like a winch cable carrying a dangerous load. She took one look at my pale, rain-soaked face, and the ambient warmth vanished from her eyes. She understood instantly that a structural collapse was underway. She did not ask empty questions. She took my arm, her grip ferociously strong, and steered me onto the elevator. Upstairs, the only illumination came from the streetlights bleeding through the blinds and the harsh, sterile blue glow of her triple-monitor workspace. The room smelled intensely of dark roasted espresso beans and the ozone hum of the server racks in her spare bedroom. She handed me a ceramic mug of black coffee. The bitter, acidic heat burned the roof of my mouth, forcing my pulse to synchronize with the present moment. Julian reported the truck stolen. Elias stripped the emotion from his tone, delivering raw intelligence to a commander. The automated system verified the title transfer. It was processed legally, digitally notarized 12 days ago. Clara set her coffee down with a sharp clack on the glass table. She moved to her main terminal, her manicured fingers flying across the backlit keyboard. "You didn't sign a vehicle transfer 12 days ago, Dad." "I haven't signed a legal document since the grant application 4 years ago." My voice sounded scraped out, belonging to a ghost haunting its own life. "But the fog, Clara. The lapses in my memory. Maybe I—" "Stop." Clara spun her chair to face me. Her eyes blazed, utterly rejecting the premise. "You are Arthur Sterling. You rebuilt a 30-foot schooner from raw timber. You do not just forget signing away your vehicles. We are going to map the damage right now." She launched a secure, encrypted tunnel into the municipal property databases. Evelyn managed our domestic accounts, continually assuring me my commercial profiles were stable, carefully wrapping my failing memory in a blanket of curated summaries. Clara bypassed all of Evelyn's firewalls. For 14 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the apartment was the furious, rhythmic clatter of keys and the hiss of the storm against the window pane. Suddenly, Clara's hands froze. She stopped breathing. Elias stepped behind her chair, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "What are you looking at?" "The shipyard." Her voice was completely devoid of air. "The land. The commercial slips." She slowly turned the central monitor toward me. Displayed in unforgiving municipal blue and white were the blueprints of my absolute ruin. 4 years ago, the deed to Sterling Maritime had been leveraged against a $600,000 high-interest commercial mortgage. But the parasitic extraction had not stopped there. For the last 48 months, the entity holding the debt, a shadow LLC registered in Delaware, had been slowly bleeding the equity dry, charging exponential management fees. The LLC's registered principal was Julian Sterling. Shipyard was in catastrophic default. The foreclosure notice had been legally executed 10 days ago, rerouted to an automated post office box in Bellevue. In less than a week, the bank would seize the property, liquidate the assets to cover the manufactured debt, and Julian's shell company would collect the payout. Evelyn and Julian had engineered a scenario where I would end up owing the executioner for the cost of the axe. "There's an anomaly." Clara's tone shifted, snagging on a detail that did not belong in the catastrophic spreadsheet. "Look at the original filing for the shadow mortgage. It required a secondary guarantor because the asset value was so high." She zoomed in on the scanned digital contract. Below the forged signature executed by the tungsten pen was a second name written in a hurried, shaking script. Marcus Sterling. The name hit my chest like a physical blow, driving the breath entirely from my lungs. My younger brother, Marcus. We had not spoken in 15 years. The silence between us was an old, ugly scar born from a brutal argument over money. 15 years ago, Marcus had abruptly demanded a massive buyout from a joint venture, draining my early liquid capital just as the shipyard was stabilizing. When I confronted him, he refused to explain, took the cash, and disappeared into a bitter, permanent exile. Evelyn had whispered in the dark of our bedroom that Marcus was a parasite, that his pride had ruined him, and that cutting him loose was the only way to save my own family. I had listened to my wife. I had spent a decade and a half believing my brother was a thief.
He lives near Aberdeen. The words tasted like ash.
In a cabin off the coast. He never left the state. Clara glanced at the digital clock on her screen. 3:14 a.m. She met Elias's gaze, then looked back at me. We cannot fight a ghost ship without knowing who launched it. We are driving to Aberdeen. The journey southwest through the pre-dawn darkness was silent and oppressive. The rain eventually fractured into a freezing coastal mist as we navigated the winding, brutalist logging roads of Grays Harbor County. Clara drove her sedan with an aggressive, punishing focus. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the towering black silhouettes of the Douglas firs, feeling the foundations of my history cracking apart beneath me. Marcus's cabin sat at the end of a flooded gravel track overlooking a gray, violently churning inlet. The structure looked exhausted. The cedar siding was blackened by years of relentless saltwater wind. A solitary, dim yellow bulb burned above the warped front door. I stepped out into the biting cold. The freezing air was thick with the smell of wet earth, rotting pine, and distant saltwater. I walked up onto the rotting wooden porch and hammered my fist against the heavy door. A minute passed. Then the heavy scrape of a deadbolt sliding back. The door opened. Marcus looked at me and the years dissolved. He was 58, but he looked deeply eroded. His beard was gray and unkempt, his eyes nested in dark, bruised hollows. When he recognized me, he did not look angry. He looked terrified. His hands instinctively gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white.
Arthur,
He rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I knew this day was coming. I waited for it. I prayed it would be you and not a process server. Let us in, Marcus. I kept my voice perfectly level. The interior of the cabin was suffocatingly small, smelling of damp wool and stale tobacco. He had lived here like a fugitive. Clara and Elias stood silently near the wood stove. Marcus collapsed into a sagging armchair, pressing his face into his rough, scarred palms. His shoulders began to heave. Above his chair, pinned to the decaying wood paneling, was a single faded Polaroid. It was the two of us 30 years ago, covered in sawdust, standing proudly in front of the first skiff we ever built together. The edges of the photo were curled and yellowed, the only clean thing in a room drowning in dust. He had kept it exactly at eye level. I didn't steal from you. The confession tore out of his throat, raw and jagged. I swear to God, Arthur, I never stole from you. Your name is on a $600,000 shadow mortgage. Clara's voice sliced through the heavy air with forensic precision. Filed 4 years ago. How did Julian get your signature? Marcus dropped his hands. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with a panic that had been marinating for 15 years. Julian didn't get my signature 4 years ago. Marcus stared at the scarred floorboards, his voice trembling. He got it 15 years ago. The small room went dead silent. Only the wind howling off the inlet made a sound. Julian came to me when he was barely 20. Marcus looked up, searching my face for any trace of belief. He brought me a brilliant commercial real estate proposal. He claimed you had fully endorsed it, Arthur, but you wanted to keep it off the primary books to shelter it from taxation. He showed me documents bearing your signature. He just needed my credit to secure the bridge loan. My jaw tightened until the molars ground together. He forged my name. And you believed him. He was your son, Marcus cried out, the betrayal still bleeding fresh. He drove your truck. He wore a watch you bought him. Why would I doubt the boy you raised? Marcus swallowed hard, his throat working convulsively. 3 months later, the bridge loan defaulted. It was a phantom property. The bank came after me for $80,000. I panicked. I called your house. I never received a call, the timeline fractured in my head, jagged pieces realigning into a horrifying new picture. Because Evelyn answered, the name dropped like acid onto the floor. She drove out here the next day. She didn't offer to help. She brought a briefcase. Elias shifted his weight near the stove, his cop instincts fully engaged. What was in the briefcase, Marcus? Fabricated accounting ledgers, Marcus's voice broke entirely. Flawless, forged documents proving that I had embezzled the $80,000 from Sterling Maritime. Evelyn laid them on this very table. She informed me that if I exposed Julian's fraud, she would take the ledgers to the district attorney. She made it clear nobody would believe the degenerate brother over the respected shipyard owner. She ordered me to demand the $80,000 from you as a buyout, pay off the defaulted loan, and disappear. He looked up at me, his face ruined by years of isolated terror. She threatened to ensure I died in a state penitentiary if I ever spoke to you again. I was terrified of her, Arthur. She didn't look like a mother protecting a son. She looked like a general executing a war. The absolute sheer scale of the horror finally took root in my chest. Evelyn had not been protecting a young Julian's mistake. She had been testing a weapon. She had used Marcus as a live-fire exercise to see if she could effectively forge documents, manipulate debt, and sever my family ties. And I had paid the buyout. I had funded my own isolation. Marcus, Clara stepped forward, gentle but unyielding. Do you have any proof, anything from that day? Marcus let out a ragged, exhausted sigh. He stood up slowly and walked to a heavy steel footlocker shoved beneath a window. He spun the combination lock, threw open the hasp, and pulled out a rusted metal lockbox. I kept everything. He placed the heavy box on the table, a fine cloud of dust puffing into the air. The original bridge loan documents. The threatening ledgers she brought. He popped the latch, reaching inside to retrieve a thick rectangular object wrapped in a plastic anti-static bag. And Julian's old encrypted laptop. Marcus slid the drive across the scarred wood. He left it in my truck the day we signed the papers. I never gave it back. I haven't plugged it into a wall in 15 years. Clara stared at the lockbox. Her eyes narrowed, assessing the rusted metal not as trash but as a tactical nuclear warhead. I stood up, moving to the table. I placed my hand on Marcus's shoulder. The muscle beneath his flannel shirt was tight with residual fear. I spent 15 years cursing you while you bled for my family. The words were woefully inadequate, a pathetic drop of water on a decades-old inferno. Marcus reached up and gripped my wrist. Take the box, Arthur. Burn them to the ground. We left Aberdeen as the pale gray dawn finally began to bleed through the overcast sky. We had the lockbox secured in the trunk. But as I sat in the passenger seat, watching the blurry shapes of the pine trees rushing past the wet window, the suffocating static suddenly returned. The mental fog rolled into my skull, heavy, metallic, and oppressive. I tried to remember the combination to my own workshop safe, and the numbers dissolved into meaningless shapes. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. My hands began to shake with a deep systemic tremor. Evelyn was waiting for me back in Seattle. And tonight, just like every night for the last 18 months, she would pour me a glass of scotch, add her special tincture, and watch my mind slowly evaporate. The realization hardened in my chest like cooling iron. My own body was the final battlefield. The drive back to Seattle felt less like a retreat and more like transporting volatile ordnance over unpaved roads. The rusted metal lockbox sat in the trunk, a heavy, silent anchor to the past. Inside Clara's sedan, the silence was absolute. It was thick with the unsaid horror of what we had just unearthed in that rotting coastal cabin. We reached Clara's apartment by 9 in the morning. The storm had finally broken, leaving the Seattle skyline looking bruised and exhausted under a pale, watery sun. I sat heavily on Clara's leather sofa, fighting the suffocating weight of the chemical fog rolling through my skull. My vision blurred slightly at the edges. My hands, resting on my denim-clad knees, trembled with a fine, uncontrollable vibration. Clara did not offer comfort. She offered war. She set the plastic-wrapped hard drive on her glass desk, booted up a standalone decryption terminal, and plugged it in. 15 years old, Elias muttered. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest. The partition structure might be corrupted. Don't push the voltage too fast. I am bypassing the main operating system entirely. Clara's voice dropped into a flat clinical register. I am executing a raw sector dump. If there is a directory tree left, I will find it. For 40 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the high-pitched whine of the old drive spinning up and the rhythmic clatter of Clara's keyboard. I gripped the armrests, desperately trying to anchor my mind to the present. I forced myself to count the rivets on a metal floor lamp. I rebuilt a V8 engine block in my head. I fought the encroaching darkness with every tool I possessed, terrified that if I let go, the fog would consume me entirely. Got it. Clara's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Elias and I moved behind her chair. The screen was black, populated by endless lines of jagged raw code. Clara executed a final command. The code resolved into a crude, archaic email client interface. These are locally cached offline drafts, Clara explained. Her eyes darted across the glowing pixels. Messages Julian wrote and saved to the drive before syncing to a server. Let us see who he was talking to 15 years ago. She opened a folder labeled Architecture. There were dozens of emails, all sent to an encrypted, anonymous address. But the tone, the vocabulary, the cold, exacting syntax, it belonged to only one person. Evelyn. Clara clicked the oldest draft, dated exactly 3 weeks before Marcus was framed.
The bridge loan is active.
Clara read aloud, her voice tightening like a bowstring. Do not deviate from the schedule. Marcus is predictable. When the pressure hits, he will panic. We need the 80,000 to fund the Bellevue shell. You execute the default. I will handle the brother. Elias swore softly under his breath. The raw premeditation was chilling. It was not a crime of opportunity. It was a perfectly synchronized military operation orchestrated by a mother and executed by her 20-year-old son. Clara's fingers flew over the keyboard, jumping forward in the timeline. She opened an email dated 4 years ago, perfectly aligning with the maritime grant forgery. The commercial mortgage is secured. Clara's voice trembled with a terrifying realization. Arthur did not question the blank overlay. His pride in you is his greatest liability. We initiate the slow bleed next quarter. His pride in you is his greatest liability. I stared at the monitor. 35 years of marriage. Decades of shared breakfasts, whispered fears in the dark, the quiet daily architecture of a life built together. She had looked at my unconditional love, the most sacred, vulnerable thing I possessed, and diagnosed it as a structural weakness to be exploited. A profound icy void opened in the center of my chest. It consumed the grief, leaving only absolute 0-degree rage. There is one more folder. Clara double-clicked an attachment hidden in a subdirectory labeled Maintenance. It was not an email. It was a high-resolution scan of a digital pharmacy receipt dated exactly 18 months ago. Clara zoomed in on the itemized lines. The prescribing physician was a private concierge doctor in Bellevue, notorious for aggressive off-label treatments. The medication was not a standard prescription. It was a custom compounded liquid, scopolamine hydrobromide, low-dose sustained formulation, transmucosal delivery vehicle. Elias leaned closer to the screen. His cop instincts fully took over. Scopolamine. That is a powerful anticholinergic alkaloid. High doses cause severe delirium and amnesia. Chronic low-dose exposure induces profound cognitive suppression, short-term memory erasure, and extreme suggestibility. He looked at me. His eyes were dark with horror. It functionally turns a human mind into wet clay. Clara spun in her chair. Her face was pale. Her jaw trembled violently. Dad, the arthritis tincture. The drops she puts in your scotch every night. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Every evening at 8 o'clock. The heavy crystal tumbler. The amber liquid. Evelyn's soft, concerned smile as she carefully counted out 4 drops from a dark amber vial. Drink up, Arthur. It will help with the joint pain. You need your rest. I had swallowed poison from the hands of my wife for 540 days. She was not just stealing the shipyard, I whispered. The words tore out of a dry throat. She was systematically erasing the man who owned it. She was turning me into a compliant vegetable so I could not fight the foreclosure. I grabbed the edge of the glass desk. The sheer towering magnitude of the betrayal threatened to crack my ribs. I had built ships to survive hurricanes. I had built my life on honesty and hard work. And this woman had calmly, patiently poured madness into my glass, watching my mind rot while she smiled. "We take this to the DA right now," Elias stated. He stepped toward his coat. "Attempted murder, aggravated assault, criminal conspiracy. I will have a warrant executed on the house by noon." The command ripped out of me, jagged and absolute. Elias stopped, turning to look at me in shock. "Arthur, she is actively poisoning you. We have the receipt. We have the motive." "A receipt is circumstantial." My voice dropped into a cold, dead calm. The fog in my head seemed to momentarily recede, burned away by the white-hot intensity of my fury. A clever defense attorney will argue she was buying it for legitimate off-label nausea treatment. Julian will claim his email account was hacked. They will drag this through civil litigation for a decade, bleeding the remaining equity to pay their legal fees. If we strike now, they survive. Clara stood up slowly. She looked at me, recognizing the master's shipwright, stepping back into his authority. "What is the play, Dad?" "I need my mind back." I looked at my trembling hands, clenching them into fists. "I cannot fight a war while my brain is submerged in chemicals. I go home. I accept the scotch. I pour the poison into the floor drain. I play the broken, confused old man." Elias shook his head, deeply alarmed. "Arthur, you are walking back into a kill zone. If she realizes you are aware." "She will not," I cut him off, my voice ironclad. "Arrogance is their true liability. They believe I am nothing. I need 3 days to clear the scopolamine from my system. 3 days to become myself again. Then we let them spring their final trap." I left Clara's apartment at noon. The drive back to the house on Mercer Island was the longest journey of my life. I parked the Chris Craft in the driveway. I sat in the cab for 10 minutes, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, mentally constructing the heavy blast-proof doors I would need to lock around my emotions. I walked through the front door. The house smelled faintly of expensive lavender and the sharp tang of brass polish. Evelyn was in the kitchen, arranging cut hydrangeas in a crystal vase. She turned as I entered. She was wearing a tailored beige cashmere sweater, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She looked elegant, concerned, and entirely lethal. "Arthur, darling," she set the pruning shears down, her brow furrowing in perfect practiced worry. "Where have you been?" Julian called. "He said there was an issue with the truck." "I do not remember." I let my shoulders sag. I intentionally slurred the words slightly, allowing my eyes to drift past her, focusing on a blank space on the wall. I let my jaw hang loose, mimicking the terrifying confusion I had genuinely felt hours earlier. "The police." They stopped me. "They said the truck was not mine." "But it is my truck, Evelyn." "Why did they say that?" Evelyn closed the distance between us. She reached up, placing her cool, soft hands on either side of my face. Her thumbs stroked my cheekbones. I had to summon every ounce of willpower in my body not to physically recoil from the touch of a murderer. "Oh, my poor love," she murmured. Her voice dripped with artificial empathy. "You must have been so frightened. Your memory is slipping again. We talked about this. You transferred the title to Julian weeks ago for tax purposes. You just forgot." She pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. It felt like a spider crawling across my skin. "Come sit down," she coaxed, leading me into the study. "It has been a traumatic morning. Let me fix your drink. Will help clear the confusion." I sank heavily into my leather armchair. I watched her walk to the antique mahogany bar cart. I watched her pour 2 fingers of the expensive single malt. I watched her pull the small amber vial from the drawer, uncap the dropper, and carefully, deliberately squeeze 4 drops of scopolamine into the glass. She walked back to my chair and handed me the tumbler. "Drink up, Arthur," she smiled. Her eyes were completely dead. I took the glass. My hand shook, playing the role perfectly. I raised it to my lips, letting the heavy scent of peat and oak hit my nose. I tipped the glass, allowing the liquid to touch my bottom lip, then intentionally coughed a harsh, rattling cough, jerking my arm. A small splash of the poisoned scotch hit my shirt collar. "Damn it," I mumbled, acting flustered. I stood up, holding the glass carefully. "I need to clean this. I am going to the workshop sink." "Arthur, just leave it." She started to object, annoyed by the delay. No, it will stain, I insisted, shuffling quickly toward the heavy oak door that led down to the basement workshop. I locked the door behind me. I stood in the cool, dimly lit cavern of my workshop. The smell of sawdust and marine varnish immediately grounded me. I walked to the heavy cast iron slop sink in the corner. I looked at the amber liquid in the tumbler. I watched the poison catch the overhead light. I tipped the glass and poured it straight down the drain. I stood there in the silence, listening to the chemical weapon vanish into the municipal sewer lines. For the first time in 18 months, my blood belonged entirely to me. I washed the glass, filled it with an inch of plain water, added a drop of caramel coloring from my wood stain kit, and walked back upstairs. I drank the fake scotch in front of her. She watched me swallow every drop, her smile returning, confident that the cage door had just locked shut. Over the next 3 days, I lived a terrifying dual existence. By day, I stumbled through the house, leaving doors open, misplacing keys, asking repetitive questions, and pouring the nightly poisoned scotch down the basement drain. Internally, the fog was lifting. Hour by hour, the crushing static dissolved. Memories sharpened into high definition. The brutal, agonizing clarity of my own mind returning felt like pulling a rusted nail out of a deep wound. It hurt, but the infection was draining. On the evening of the third day, the trap finally sprang. I was sitting in my study, staring blankly at a maritime map. A heavy oak door swung open without a knock. Julian strode into the room, wearing a sharp navy suit flanked by Evelyn. He carried a sleek black leather folio. He did not offer a greeting. He threw the folio onto my desk. "Dad," Julian's voice was clipped, devoid of the charming veneer he used in public. It was the voice of an executioner tired of waiting. "Your cognitive decline has become a massive liability. The bank is moving on the shipyard. We need to restructure the assets immediately to protect the family." He unzipped the folio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slapped them onto the map. "This is a medical conservatorship and a full power of attorney." Julian leaned across the desk. His eyes were hard and flat, identical to his mother's. "It transfers full executive control of your remaining estate, your medical decisions, and the shipyard equity directly to me." Evelyn moved to stand behind him, crossing her arms. "It is for your own good, Arthur. You are no longer capable of making rational decisions." I looked at the documents. I looked at the heavy tungsten pen Julian placed deliberately beside them. The fog was entirely gone. My mind was a razor, sharp and deadly. But I let my hands tremble. I looked up at Julian, projecting absolute helpless terror. "A conservatorship," I whispered. I let a tear gather in the corner of my eye. "Julian, you are taking everything, the yard, the house?" "I am saving everything," Julian snapped, leaning closer. The aggression bled through. "You are functionally incompetent, Dad. If you do not sign this right now, the bank takes it all tomorrow and we will put you in a state-run facility." He pushed the pen toward my hand. I needed to buy time. I needed Clara and Elias to finish setting the snare. I picked up the pen. My hand shook so violently I dropped it onto the desk. I let out a wretched broken sob, burying my face in my hand. "I cannot," I wailed. The performance demanded every ounce of my pride. "I cannot focus. The words are swimming. Please, Julian. My head hurts so badly. Please, just give me until the legacy dinner. Let me stand on that stage one last time as the owner. Let me say goodbye to my peers. I will sign it backstage. I swear to God, I will sign it." Julian's jaw tightened in furious frustration. He looked back at Evelyn. Evelyn analyzed my broken, weeping form. She saw a defeated, chemically lobotomized old man clinging to a pathetic shred of public vanity. She smiled, a thin, cruel line of absolute victory.
Let him have his moment, Julian.
Evelyn's tone smoothed over the tension. "The legacy dinner is in 48 hours. We will execute the documents backstage. It will make the transition look entirely voluntary." Julian snatched the documents off the desk, shoved them into the folio, and retrieved the tungsten pen. 48 hours, old man," Julian sneered, the mask completely gone. "Enjoy your final bow." They walked out, closing the door behind them. I sat alone in the quiet study. I lowered my hands from my face. The tears were gone. The trembling stopped instantly. My breathing was slow, deep, and perfectly rhythmic. I reached under the desk and tapped a burner phone Clara had smuggled into the house. They took the bait, I said softly to the dark room. Prepare the chronometer. They had taken the bait. I lowered the burner phone, placing it silently onto the leather blotter of my mahogany desk. The heavy silence of the Mercer Island house pressed inward, thick and suffocating. 48 hours. That was the exact distance between my current purgatory and the moment I would strike a match to their entire manufactured reality. The following afternoon, Evelyn left for a 4-hour appointment at a downtown salon, a necessary aesthetic preparation for her impending public victory lap. 10 minutes after her Mercedes cleared the driveway, Clara bypassed the main gates. She entered through the subterranean workshop access, bringing the winter chill of the Puget Sound with her. She was not alone. She brought a man named Silas, a private surveillance contractor who moved with the economical, soundless grace of a ghost. He carried a heavy Pelican case. I led them up the back stairs into my study. We need a fixed vantage point, Clara instructed, her eyes sweeping the room with clinical detachment. Something stationary. Something they would never think to cover. I walked over to the corner of my desk. Sitting on a polished teak base was my most prized possession, a 19th century brass ship's chronometer. It was a massive, heavy instrument housed in a gimbaled suspension ring to keep the clock face perfectly level in violent seas. The brass was cold to the touch, smelling faintly of old oil and sea salt. The ticking of its mechanical escapement was a deep, rhythmic heartbeat that filled the quiet room. Use this, I told Silas. Silas unpacked a jeweler's loop and a micro-soldering iron. For 45 minutes, the study smelled of melting flux and hot wire. Working with surgical precision, he removed the heavy glass bezel. He hollowed out the center of the black enamel Roman numeral 12. Inside that microscopic void, he embedded a 4K optical transmitter no larger than a grain of coarse sand. The microphone array was threaded invisibly behind the brass winding key. It transmits via an encrypted cellular relay, Silas explained, packing his tools. He did not raise his voice above a murmur. Direct to your daughter's server. Battery life is 72 hours. They could stare directly at the clock face and see nothing but the time. Clara placed her hand on the cold brass dome. She looked at me, her eyes completely devoid of fear. Elias is at the district attorney's office. I will monitor the feed from the van. Make them talk, Dad. Make them feel invincible. Friday evening arrived with a bitter, freezing coastal wind. It was the night of the Sterling Maritime Legacy dinner. I stood in my dressing room, buttoning the crisp white shirt of my tuxedo. The starched cotton felt entirely alien against skin accustomed to sawdust and canvas. The air carried the sharp chemical tang of shoe polish. I adjusted the black bow tie, staring into the mirror at a man who looked like an aging monarch preparing for his own execution. My bedroom door clicked open. Julian stepped inside, wearing a flawless midnight blue tuxedo. Evelyn followed closely behind, draped in a floor-length silver gown that caught the ambient light like a weapon. The heavy, cloying scent of her lavender perfume immediately overwhelmed the room, coating the back of my throat. Evelyn carried a heavy crystal tumbler. Amber liquid sloshed gently against the rim.
Arthur, darling.
She smiled, stepping into the dressing room. You look incredibly distinguished. I brought you a drink. Just to settle your nerves before the cameras tonight. I turned away from the mirror. I let my shoulders hunch. I allowed a terrifying, vacant glassiness to overtake my eyes, playing the role of the chemically hollowed old man. I shuffled slowly past them, moving out of the dressing room and into the adjacent study. They followed me exactly as I knew they would. I sank into the leather chair behind my desk. The brass chronometer sat perfectly still to my right. Tick. Tick. I don't want it, Evelyn, I mumbled. I stared at the carpet, letting my hands tremble violently against my thighs. My head is so heavy. Everything is slipping. Julian scoffed. He crossed the room, leaning his knuckles against the mahogany desk, placing his face inches from mine. You are drinking it, old man, Julian commanded, dropping the polished veneer completely. The sheer naked contempt in his eyes was breathtaking. You are going to walk onto that stage tonight, smile for the industry press, and announce your retirement. Then backstage, you are signing the conservatorship. I looked up at him. I forced a tear to well and spill over my bottom lash line. I built this yard with my bare hands, Julian. The tremor in my voice was genuine, fueled by an agonizing 30-year grief. Why are you taking it like a thief? I would have given it to you. Why did you force Marcus out? Julian laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed off the bookshelves. "'Cause waiting for you to naturally decay was taking too long." He straightened up, adjusting his immaculate cuffs. He was utterly drunk on his own perceived genius. The commercial mortgage was entirely too easy to secure. You didn't even read the cover sheet. As for Marcus, he was a liability. He asked too many questions. Framing him 15 years ago was just basic risk management. I needed the $80,000 to fund my Bellevue shell company, and he was the perfect collateral damage. I shifted my gaze to Evelyn. She stood near the bookshelves, watching the exchange with cold maternal pride. "Evelyn," I whispered, projecting absolute broken despair. "My mind. I can't remember my own carpenters. What is happening to me? Are you trying to kill me?" Evelyn stepped forward. She placed the crystal tumbler on the desk right beside the ticking brass chronometer. The hidden lens stared directly up at her face.
Kill you?
"Heavens no, Arthur." Her tone was light, conversational, as if discussing the weather. She reached out and patted my trembling hand. "A dead husband initiates a messy probate process. An incapacitated husband is far more useful. The few drops of scopolamine I put in your drink every night aren't lethal. They simply soften the clay. They keep you compliant. You won't remember any of this conversation by the time we reach the museum." The confession was absolute. It was clean, arrogant, and legally devastating. I stared at the amber liquid in the glass. I let out a long, ragged exhale, acting as though the last remaining column of my resistance had just crumbled to dust. "Give me the glass," I defeatedly whispered. Evelyn smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey stop struggling. She handed me the tumbler. I brought the glass to my lips. I took a deep, deliberate swallow, letting the burning heat of the unspiked scotch coat my throat. I had poured the poisoned batch down the sink an hour ago, replacing it with clean alcohol. I swallowed again, closing my eyes, leaning my head back against the leather chair. "Good boy," Julian sneered. He picked up his black leather folio containing the conservatorship documents. "The car is waiting downstairs. Try not to embarrass us." They turned and walked out of the study, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind them. I sat in the silence for exactly 10 seconds. The trembling in my hands ceased instantly. My spine straightened into a rigid, unyielding line. The manufactured confusion vanished from my eyes, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I reached under the desk and tapped the burner phone. "Did you get it?" I asked the quiet room. Clara's voice crackled back through the tiny speaker, thick with adrenaline and barely contained fury. "Audio and video are crystal clear. They confessed to the shadow mortgage, the extortion of Marcus, and the scopolamine. I just forwarded the encrypted file to Elias." A secondary voice came through the line. "Elias." He sounded completely different than the officer in the rainstorm. He sounded like a predator who had just unlatched his cage. "The district attorney has the footage, Arthur." Elias's voice was pure, freezing iron. "The warrants are signed. I have 2 federal financial crimes units and 4 plainclothes officers mobilizing to the museum right now. We are locking down the perimeter. Do not move on them until I am off the stage," I instructed, my voice dropping an octave. "I want them in front of the entire room." "Understood," Elias confirmed. I hung up the phone. I stood up from the desk. I looked down at the brass chronometer. Tick. 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 The mechanical gears ground forward, indifferent to the massive human wreckage about to occur. Time only moved in one direction. I adjusted my bow tie one final time. I smoothed the lapels of my tuxedo. I had spent my entire adult life building vessels that could withstand the violent, unpredictable fury of the ocean. Tonight, I was bringing the storm indoors. I walked out of the study, stepping into the hallway. I could hear Evelyn calling impatiently from the grand foyer downstairs. The heavy mahogany front door was open, letting in the freezing night air. "Arthur, the limousine is waiting," her voice echoed up the stairwell, sharp and demanding. "I am coming, Evelyn," I replied evenly. I walked down the stairs, every step deliberate and measured. The fog was gone. The hesitation was gone. There was only the true north of absolute justice, and I was holding the compass. The limousine tires hissed relentlessly over the wet Seattle pavement, carrying us toward the city center. I sat in the rear-facing leather seat, trapped in the oppressive, suffocating cloud of Evelyn's lavender perfume, watching the city lights smear across the rain-streaked glass. Julian sat opposite me, furiously typing on his phone. Evelyn stared out the window, her silver gown catching the passing streetlights in sharp metallic flashes. Neither of them spoke to me. They did not need to. In their minds, I was already a ghost, a chemically lobotomized passenger being chauffeured to his own funeral. I let my chin rest against my chest, slowing my breathing, tasting the sharp, coppery tang of adrenaline building at the back of my throat. The Seattle Maritime Museum was a breathtaking cathedral of glass and steel. Suspended high above the main gala floor hung the massive skeletal hull of a 19th-century whaling ship, its ancient wooden ribs casting long shadows over the white linen banquet tables below. The room was packed. Hundreds of elite shipwrights, naval architects, investors, and local politicians milled about in formal wear. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive champagne, and the oceanic brine of the museum's saltwater exhibits. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the delicate notes completely swallowed by the ambient hum of wealth and power. Julian immediately stepped into his element. He gripped hands, flashed his brilliantly manufactured smile, and expertly guided Evelyn through the crowd. They paraded me along like a prized fading relic. I played my part. I shuffled my feet. I let my gaze wander aimlessly when industry peers asked me questions, allowing Julian to smoothly intercept and answer on my behalf. I watched the pity bloom in the eyes of men I had done business with for 3 decades. They saw a master craftsman who had lost his mind. At 8:30, an event coordinator with a clipboard materialized beside us. She touched Julian's elbow, gesturing toward a heavy curtain near the stage. The green room was a small, soundproofed alcove behind the main projection screen, smelling of stale coffee and hot electrical wiring. The moment the heavy velvet curtain fell closed behind us, Julian's public smile vanished. He unzipped the black leather folio. He pulled out the thick stack of conservatorship documents and dropped them onto a glass coffee table. Beside them, he placed the heavy gunmetal gray tungsten pen. It landed with a dull, final thud. The transition speech is in 4 minutes. Julian checked his gold wristwatch, not bothering to look up. Sign it now. I will hold the documents while you speak. I stared at the pen. The same pen he had used to steal the shipyard 4 years ago. I let my hands shake. I reached for the tungsten barrel, my fingers hovering millimeters above the cold metal. I drew a ragged, uneven breath. Julian, I kept my voice weak, perfectly capturing the desperate plea of a broken man. Let me speak first. Please. If I sign this now, I won't have the strength to walk out there. Let me say goodbye to my life. I will sign it the second I walk off. Julian's jaw tightened. He despised deviations from his schedule. Evelyn stepped forward, smoothing the lapels of Julian's tuxedo. She cast a clinical, dismissive glance at my trembling hands. Let him do it his way, Julian. Her voice was a cold whisper. He can barely stand. Let him babble his goodbyes, and we end this immediately after. Julian snatched the tungsten pen off the table, slipping it into his breast pocket. He pointed a sharp finger at my chest. 5 minutes. You read the script I wrote for you. If you deviate by a single syllable, I am cutting your microphone from the soundboard. The stage manager opened the curtain. Mr. Sterling, we are ready for you. Julian walked out first. I followed slowly, the bright, blinding glare of the stage spotlights hitting my face like a physical wave of heat. The string quartet faded out. The low murmur of the massive crowd silenced entirely as Julian stepped up to the polished teak podium.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Julian's voice boomed through the massive hall, rich, warm, and dripping with artificial reverence. Tonight we gather to honor a titan of the maritime industry. But time comes for us all. Due to aggressive, unforeseen cognitive health challenges, my father has made the difficult decision to step down and transfer full control of Sterling Maritime to the next generation. He turned toward me, extending his hand. The crowd erupted into a wave of sympathetic, sustained applause. I walked to the podium. I gripped the cold, polished edges of the teak wood. I looked out over the sea of faces, past the blinding glare of the lights. I saw investors. I saw politicians. I saw Evelyn standing in the front row, her hands elegantly clasped, wearing an expression of practiced, tragic sorrow. I did not reach into my pocket for Julian's script. I took a deep, perfectly steady breath. The tremor in my hands vanished completely. The manufactured vacancy in my eyes evaporated, replaced by a terrifying absolute clarity. I leaned into the microphone. I am not retiring, my voice did not shake. It carried the heavy resonant bass of a man who spent his life shouting over diesel engines and circular saws. And my mind has never been clearer. The applause died instantly. A confused electric murmur rippled through the front rows. Julian, standing 10 feet to my left, froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a marble statue. He took a half step toward me, his hand reaching out to cut the microphone feed. He was too late. The stage lights abruptly snapped off. The entire museum plunged into darkness save for the emergency exit signs. A collective gasp echoed off the high glass ceilings. Behind me, the massive 30-foot AV projection screen flared to life with blinding 4K brilliance. Clara had hijacked the feed. The screen did not show a retrospective video of wooden boats. It showed a split screen. On the left side, a highly detailed forensic algorithm highlighted the forged signature from the commercial mortgage, perfectly matching the pressure patterns to Julian's handwriting. On the right, the digital pharmacy receipt for scopolamine glowed in unforgiving municipal blue. The crowd fell dead silent. The only sound in the cavernous room was the hum of the massive projector. Then the audio kicked in. It was the raw, crystal-clear recording from the brass chronometer in my study. The acoustics of the museum amplified Julian's voice to a deafening roar. Because waiting for you to naturally decay was taking too long. Julian's recorded sneer bounced off the whaling ship suspended above us. Framing him 15 years ago was just basic risk management. I needed the $80,000 to fund my Bellevue shell company, and he was the perfect collateral damage. Someone in the third row dropped a champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor like a gunshot. Julian spun around, staring at the 30-foot projection of his own crimes. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The immaculate, untouchable prince of the waterfront was disintegrating in real time. The screen shifted. The footage cut to Evelyn, standing in my study, placing the glass of poisoned scotch on the mahogany desk.
Kill you?
Heavens no, Arthur. Evelyn's cold, conversational whisper now echoed like the voice of a demon through the massive hall. The few drops of scopolamine I put in your drink every night aren't lethal. They simply soften the clay. They keep you compliant. The reaction from the crowd was visceral. It was not mere shock. It was absolute collective revulsion. Men and women I had known for decades physically backed away from the front row. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I looked down at Evelyn. Her hands were clutching her throat, tearing at her diamond necklace. The practiced, elegant mask had shattered completely, leaving only the panicked, hyperventilating face of a trapped predator.
Turn it off.
Julian finally screamed, lunging toward the AV cables at the edge of the stage.
Turn it off. It's a deep fake. It's fake.
The stage lights snapped back on. Elias Vance was already standing on the stage. He had not come from the front doors. He had moved through the catering corridors in the darkness. He was not wearing his uniform. He wore a dark tactical jacket, his badge chained around his neck, looking every bit the lethal instrument of the law. 4 federal agents stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains, cutting off every possible exit. In the back of the hall, uniform officers stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the main double doors. Julian Sterling, Elias's voice required no microphone. It sliced through the chaos with absolute authority. You are under arrest for aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny, and criminal extortion. An agent grabbed Julian's arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. The heavy tungsten pen slipped from his breast pocket, clattering uselessly across the wooden stage. The sharp, mechanical ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed over the silent crowd. 2 more agents moved down the stairs toward the front row. Evelyn tried to step backward, her silver heels catching on the hem of her gown. She stumbled, losing her balance. Evelyn Sterling Elias descended the steps, looking down at the woman who had poisoned my blood for a year and a half. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud and administering a Schedule II narcotic without consent. Arthur, Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking in wild, unrestrained panic as the agent secured her wrists. Arthur, tell them to stop. You are my husband. You can't let them do this. I stood at the podium. I looked at her, feeling no pity, no rage, and no grief. I felt nothing but the clean, cold emptiness of a swept floor. I am not your husband, Evelyn. I did not raise my voice, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. I was just the clay, and the clay has hardened. They dragged Julian and Evelyn through the center aisle of the museum. The crowd parted for them like water, refusing to look them in the eye, allowing them to take the long, humiliating walk past hundreds of the most powerful people in the city. The heavy glass doors of the museum opened, swallowing them into the flashing red and blue lights waiting in the freezing rain. I stepped down from the podium. Clara emerged from the AV booth, running down the side aisle. She threw her arms around my neck, holding on with a ferocious, trembling strength. The poison was gone. The shipyard was safe. But as Elias walked back toward us, his face drawn tight with a dark, heavy grimace, I knew the wreckage was not fully cleared. He pulled a sealed manila envelope from his tactical vest. The return address belonged to a private DNA testing facility. I did not open the envelope under the blinding, chaotic glare of the museum lights. I took the heavy manila packet from Elias's hand, feeling the rigid cardstock against my calloused fingers, and I carried it home. I placed it on the center of my kitchen table. I let it sit there for 3 weeks. I needed the dust to settle. I needed the residual ghosts of the scopolamine to completely vacate my bloodstream, leaving my mind sharp, cold, and utterly my own. When the morning finally arrived to break the seal, a relentless driving rain had returned to Seattle. Clara sat across from me, a mug of bitter black coffee warming her hands. Elias stood by the window watching the gray swell of Puget Sound. I slid my thumb under the flap. The paper tore with a sharp, dry rasp. I pulled out the single sheet of clinical, laminated laboratory results. I did not bother reading the dense columns of allele comparisons or locus charts. I dropped my eyes directly to the bold, unforgiving text at the bottom. Probability of paternity. The tested male individual is excluded as the biological offspring of Arthur Sterling. I set the paper down on the oak table. The acidic taste of the coffee at the back of my throat suddenly turned to ash. 33 years. I had taught a boy how to hold a block plane. I had carried him on my shoulders through the deafening roar of the boatyards. I had watched him graduate, bought him his first car, and poured every ounce of a father's unconditional pride into his foundation. He had never been mine. He was a cuckoo in the nest, planted deliberately to consume the resources of the host. Clara reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her grip was a vice, anchoring me to the present. He was an adult making his own choices, Dad, Clara murmured, reading the absolute devastation tracking across my face. He chose the greed. He chose the poison. He was an instrument, Elias corrected quietly. He turned away from the window. He walked to the table and set down a thick bound stack of photocopied pages. We executed the final asset seizure warrants on Evelyn's Bellevue safe deposit box yesterday afternoon. We were looking for offshore account routing numbers. We found a diary instead. Elias slid the top page toward me. The paper smelled faintly of old dust and closed spaces. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Evelyn's elegant, left-leaning cursive, the ink faded to a rusted brown. The date at the top of the page was 35 years old. 3.5 decades ago, Elias explained, his voice stripped of all emotion, you were a junior shipwright. You blew the whistle on a massive municipal contract. You condemned a massive shipment of rot-hollowed Douglas fir. You saved lives, Arthur. But your testimony triggered a federal investigation that bankrupted the supplier. My chest tightened. The memories flooded back with agonizing clarity. The supplier had been a corrupt, vicious man named Thomas Vance. He had lost everything and died of a massive coronary 2 years later in absolute disgrace. Thomas Vance had a daughter, Elias stated, tapping the faded ink. The kitchen tilted. The sound of the rain lashing against the glass suddenly sounded like deafening static. Evelyn. Evelyn Vance. I looked down at the 35-year-old cursive. He destroyed my family's legacy for the sake of his righteous, miserable wood. I will use that exact righteousness to hollow out his life. The boy I am currently carrying will bear his name, eat from his table, and eventually serve as the instrument of his absolute ruin. She had not married me for love. She had not even married me for money. She had married me as a sleeper agent of historical, ideological vengeance. Julian had already been conceived with another man before she ever walked into that dockside diner and smiled at me. I had spent my entire adult life sharing a bed with an assassin who had simply been waiting for the agonizingly slow poison of time to do its work. I pressed my palms flat against the oak table. I breathed in, forcing the oxygen deep into my lungs. The sheer towering magnitude of the premeditation could have crushed me. Instead, it liberated me. The 30 years of marriage had not been a failure on my part. It had been a military siege, and I had survived it. Winter came to the Pacific Northwest, bringing freezing winds and the cold, unyielding hammer of the justice system. The King County Courthouse smelled of industrial floor wax and damp wool. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Clara and Elias. On my right sat Marcus. My brother wore a tailored suit I had bought him, his beard neatly trimmed, the terrified, hunted look finally washed from his eyes. We had spent the last 2 months rebuilding the bridge between us, timber by timber. The heavy wooden door beside the judge's bench opened. Julian and Evelyn were escorted into the courtroom. They wore matching, sterile gray detention uniforms. The tailored suits and the silver gowns were gone, and without the expensive armor of their stolen wealth, they looked incredibly small. Julian kept his eyes locked on the floor, his jaw working in a rigid, anxious rhythm. Evelyn looked hollowed out. The elegant, silver-haired matriarch had withered into a fragile, hollow shell. Her arrogance had evaporated the moment the cell-block doors had slammed shut on her 35-year masterpiece. The gavel cracked against the sounding block like a gunshot. The sentences were delivered with municipal efficiency. Julian Sterling, 15 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated wire fraud and criminal extortion, with a mandatory restitution order that legally nullified the shadow mortgage and returned Sterling Maritime entirely to my name. Evelyn Sterling, 12 years for conspiracy and administering a Schedule II narcotic. As the bailiff stepped forward to secure her handcuffs, Evelyn finally turned her head. She looked across the expanse of the courtroom, past the oak railings, and found my eyes. I did not look away. I did not offer her a sneer of triumph or a tear of grief. I offered her the worst punishment a man can give to his tormentor: absolute, total indifference. Spring arrived in Seattle not with a whisper, but with a brilliant, aggressive burst of color. The cherry blossoms ignited along the waterfront, and the biting winter chill gave way to the warm, salt-laced breezes of May. I stood in the vestibule of a stone chapel overlooking the harbor, adjusting the cuffs of my tuxedo. My mind was a razor. The heavy chemical fog of the scopolamine was a distant, evaporating nightmare. My hands, still scarred and calloused from a lifetime of shaping wood, were perfectly steady. The heavy oak doors of the chapel opened, letting in the deep, resonant thrum of a solitary cello. Clara stepped up beside me. She wore a dress of flawless white silk, carrying a bouquet of gardenias that filled the narrow vestibule with a sweet, overpowering fragrance. She looked breathtaking. She looked like the absolute best parts of my life, forged in fire and polished to a mirror shine. I offered her my arm. She looped her hand through it, resting her fingers against the dark fabric of my suit. "Ready, Dad?" she whispered, her eyes bright and shining. "I have never been more ready," I replied, the truth of the statement ringing in my chest like a struck bell. We walked down the aisle together. At the end of the altar stood Elias, his tactical jacket replaced by a sharp black tuxedo, his eyes locked on my daughter with an expression of profound, unwavering devotion. In the front pew, Marcus smiled, wiping a tear from his cheek with a rough, weathered thumb. After the vows were spoken and the champagne was poured, I slipped out of the reception hall and walked down to the gravel parking lot. Sitting under the warm afternoon sun was my 1958 Chris Craft flatbed truck. I had spent the last 3 weekends in the shipyard, stripping away the old varnish and applying 5 new coats of marine lacquer. The mahogany side rails gleamed like wet glass. Tied to the heavy steel bumper were trailing strings of white tin cans and a hand-painted "Just Married" sign. Inside the cab, resting perfectly centered on the dashboard, was a framed, faded Polaroid. It was the picture of Marcus and me from 30 years ago, rescued from his rotting cabin. I leaned against the polished fender, listening to the distant sound of the wedding band bleeding through the chapel windows, and I looked out at the water. Trust is not a blank check. I know that now. Naivety is not a virtue, and looking away from the shadows in your own home is not an act of grace. Love without vigilance is simply a surrendered fortress waiting to be sacked. Evelyn had built her entire 35-year empire on the assumption that my decency would render me blind. She was wrong. The blindness was chemical, but the foundation of my life was built on bedrock. If there is a lesson buried in the wreckage of Sterling Maritime, it is this: pay attention to the people you love. Watch their hands. Listen to the silence behind their words. Attention is not suspicion. Attention is the most rigorous, honest form of love a human being can offer. I am a master shipwright. I have built vessels my whole life. I know that everything built on lies will eventually crack under the immense crushing pressure of the deep. But what is built honestly, even if it is built slowly with calloused hands and a fractured heart, will hold water. It will carry you through the storm. I pulled a white gardenia from my lapel, tossed it onto the passenger seat of the Chris Craft, and walked back inside to dance with my daughter.